Hello and welcome. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon all of you. I want to start my session today by acknowledging that where I am today, this is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's also a part of the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, Inuit, and most recently, the people of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. And for me personally, as a Muslim, it is part of my faith to serve all of humanity and creation, to stand for truth and justice and address inequalities wherever I may see it around me, with a sincere concern for people and all of creation. And I recognize that the nature and depth of suffering that the Indigenous peoples of this land have experienced and continue to experience can neither be fully understood nor can it be completely healed, but I do hope to walk with them on this journey of healing and support their efforts to claim justice together. This session this afternoon, strengthening our communal spaces through building earthly connections, building inclusive and interconnective earth-based practices within the library is what I will be sharing with you. I want to thank you for being here with me today. I know there are many interesting sessions happening in parallel, and for you to give value and be here, I appreciate that. My name, as I said, is Maimouna Hussein. I am a mother. I am a community-based collaborator. I hold a master's in education, and I am completing my eco-psychology, a degree in eco-psychology, my PhD candidacy currently. And eco-psychology is the area of study that looks at that interconnective relationship between humans and the earth. And I also look at this from the perspective of diverse narratives and diverse communities. So I'll be sharing a little bit about that from the perspective of librarianship and library leadership. What's the agenda going to look like? We are going to talk a little bit about what the climate change crisis is, what the impacts of that is. We're going to talk a little bit about interconnection. We're going to talk about libraries and climate change, how we want to build a collective Earth community. We're going to talk a little bit about diverse communities in this narrative, and we'll do a conclusion. So that's what the next little while is going to look like. So what is happening right now in terms of climate change? Let's look at a few statistics, facts that we know around us. We know that we're losing species at an unprecedented rate. We know that temperatures are rising. We see this here in Canada. We're seeing forest fires happen much regularly, the devastation that's happening from that. We're seeing the melting of the glaciers and the impact that that's having on wildlife and water temperatures. We're seeing complete, lands that were so rich now dry up completely. As you may know, in Lake Chad, since the 1960s, we have actually lost so much of Lake Chad that only 10% of what it was in the 60s remains. And then what is the impact on human life from that? Well, we know that this is really impacting the way of life, the identity, the histories of Indigenous people across the globe, how they connect with the land, defining who they are, how they access resources, all of these things. We know that there is a shortage now in distribution and access to resources, making people more dependent on relief. We know that people are being displaced from their homes due to what's happening in terms of climate change, whether that's the flooding or fires. People are becoming completely displaced internally within their lands and their nations. And then there's the emotional impact when you deal with all of this, right? So you have this constant narrative or these constant experiences. The fact that we're hearing these things, that we're never going to be able to go back to the state that we were. The fact that, youth who are kind of trying to deal with this reality that, what will the earth look like in their own lifetime? And we see youth around the world engaging in climate strikes. we have this reality that the IPRCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that just reported this last summer that by 2050, we are expecting 150 to 200 million climate refugees, people that are going to be displaced due to climate change induced destruction to where they're living. And that by far exceeds any other form of human displacement. And so then you also have all of these things that we're dealing with now, compounded with the fact that we have been dealing for the last couple of years with COVID and then the recession. And so all of these things from an emotional and mental impact is huge. And just to kind of add to that a little bit more, the statistics and the facts that we know that at least this was reported in 2018 by WWF, World Wildlife Foundation, that the current species extinction rates are 100 times to 100 to 1,000 times greater than the natural extinction rate. We know that population decline of fish, bird, mammals, amphibians are declining at a rate of 60%, and this was between 1970 and 2014. We know we're losing reefs in our marine habitats at a rate where we may actually lose 90% of all reefs by 2050. And we know that reefs actually protect waves, protecting almost 200 million people around the world. We know that we've lost forest. 239 million hectares of natural forest was lost between 1990 and 2018. What does that mean? To make it a little more realistic, it's about 1.5 times of America. 1.5 times the size of America worth of natural forest has been lost. Global biodiversity. There has been no precedent to this rate of loss of biodiversity and ecosystems around us. And so these are the types of things that we're contending with when we think about the climate change crisis. And these are the things that are mentally impacting us. And we know now, according to a Pew Research study that was done just this past year, that 72% of people worldwide are worried that the global climate change will harm them personally at some point in their life. So people are thinking about this. This is on their minds, and they are worried. We know that what we're dealing with right now is that we're actually seeing in the news on a day in, day out basis, or people that we may know around us struggling. We're living in a time where severe wildfire and drought and flooding are happening in front of our eyes. And we've got to really be able to look at those things directly in the eye without being accused of being negative or thinking, kind of this, doom narrative. How do we do that? And these are the questions that climate psychologists like Renee Lertzman are exploring. We know that psychologists are looking at, the fact that climate change is so real and it's so rational. We have the facts in front of us that we have the right to be worried. But it's also the issue is that it's something that's in constant flux. So we can't adapt to it because the intensity actually is increasing consistently in front of us, and it's uncertain. We can't control it. And so these things cause anxiety and fear within many people. And normally, at least in the world of psychology, dealing with, grief and other emotions, people usually deal with it in one of two ways. One is to try to actually solve the issue, or the second is to try to control our attitudes or change our attitudes towards the issue. But the fact that no one person can actually slow the global warming or the climate change, so we don't have that control, and that powerlessness, it can actually take a hold of us, and it can cause us to really retreat into denial or retreat into kind of really some deep mental health emotions around climate change. So then what can be a third way of coping if we can't really change the situation, and if we're going to have to, deal with our attitude, but then we have this constantly compounding issue? Well, Climate psychologists are talking about a third way. And so just this past summer, New York Times actually released this article on how to kind of calm your own climate anxiety, where it talks about two key things, and that is connection to the earth and to one another, and action as being the antidote to dealing with this anxiety. And really what we need to be able to feel calm, or to be able to do something, or to deal with these emotions, we need to really be able to have agency, influence over the situation, rather than feeling overwhelmed and retreating. And that's what we need to actually work towards. And Dr. Ashley Consolo, who is a climate grief researcher, says that climate change is really asking us to be different, to accept that there's this honest truth of climate change in front of us, but then also hope in something better. And that hope becomes an act of being deeply present, and an act of engagement and doing. Okay. And the outdoors, one thing that's really unique about the outdoors is that it is simultaneously that source of potential stress and emotions, and deep emotions, but it is also that source of well-being simultaneously. And we know over the past year and two rather, a lot of professionals, medical professionals, are prescribing time in nature as a form of healing. We know that research is showing a lot of strong correlations around the fact that being outdoors can support and benefit mental health. It can boost memory. It can improve cardiovascular health, and help us just live longer, healthier lives. It helps lower cortisol levels within our body, and cortisol is that body stress hormone that we have. And doctors in parts of Canada have actually started, here in Ontario as well, have started to really provide these nature prescriptions, right? So for people to cope with mental illnesses as well as physical health. And we know studies show us that nature, sounds of nature, actually help our well-being and reduce some of that stress and even pain, physical pains that we feel in our body. So, research is also showing us that plants bring peace to horticulturists, gardeners who are, dealing with grief and depression and anxiety. So it's that place that can potentially cause a lot of stress and anxiety within us, nature, but the nature also has this really simultaneous ability to also be able to calm us and heal us and connect us to what is good for us. So I want to talk a little bit about this relationship between humans and the earth in context of what I'm sure some of you will already be aware of this, what's been called the Anthropocene. Okay, so the geological periods within the Earth have been divided. So I'm sure you guys have heard of things like the Holocene period, the Mesozoic period, the Jurassic period, and most recently, geologists say that we have been in this unit of geological time called the Anthropocene. And what this Anthropocene is being described as is the most recent period in the Earth's history where human activity has started to have a serious and significant impact on the planet's climate and ecosystems. In no other time in history has human impact been so great. And this is where the name Anthropocene comes, because anthro meaning humans, right? And so we really want to think about moving out of that, where our behaviors and our activities and the way that we are living on this earth is impacting negatively the state of the earth to such immense degrees. And Dr. Glenn Albrecht, who's an Australian philosopher and environmental sustainability professor, writes extensively on this. He says that we really need to start to think about moving into the symbiocene. And as the name itself implies, symbiosis, right? And so he says, symbiocene implies living together, humans and the earth, for mutual benefit. And I wish to use this profoundly important concept as the basis for what I hope will be the next period of Earth history. As a core aspect of ecological thinking, symbiosis affirms the interconnectedness of life and all living things. And this is what we really want to start thinking about. How do we recognize, understand, relate to this interconnectedness of all living things on the earth, humans and all other aspects of the earth? So how then do we apply these things into a library setting is what I'm here to talk to you about today. And so with that kind of background, talking a little bit about what climate change is, talking about, that relationship between humans and the earth, let's move a little bit now to talk about libraries. Well, what do we know about libraries? There are four things, at least in my research, that that we want to think about when we think about libraries. First is that there's a common mission between, I would say, all libraries, and that is to ensure that all people have access to education and lifelong opportunities. And public libraries will offer free access to resources. That's a generally common mission across libraries. The second piece is that we know about accessibility. Libraries serve as cultural institutions that serve all members of society, including children, young adults, and elderly as well. And we know that libraries promote universal literacy by providing access to information, advanced digital inclusion. They also look to preserve and provide access to world's culture and heritage. So they really serve as centers for learning, research, knowledge sharing. And then the last piece that we know more and more about libraries is that they're really invested in ensuring that communities have access to develop a wide range of literacies, such as reading, writing, print literacy, numeracy, media literacy, digital literacy, and financial literacy, from a wide spectrum of systems of learning, right? And so knowing all of these, I want to talk a little bit more about expanding that concept of literacy. And I'll ask you to do this with me in the next few screens here. I'm going to ask you, some of you may already know what a Stroop test is, or you may not know it by name. As soon as I introduce it to you, you'll be like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. It's something that's often used in psychology to help understand interference in reaction time. And so what I'm going to be asking you to do is read what you see and to try to do it as fast as you can without taking too much time to pause and think. Okay, so what you will do is you will see something in the next screen, and I will quickly read the, not quickly, I'll take my time. I will tell you what to do, and I will ask you to go ahead and do it. So what you see here are colors written. What I would like to ask you to do when I say go is to read the written words as fast as you can. So for example, red, yellow, green, black. Okay, so continuing that way. So start now and read them as fast as you can. And pause. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to ask you to actually read the colors and not the words, okay? So here you will read purple, pink, orange, blue, red, and so forth. When I say start, I would ask you to read the colors of the ink as fast as you can, starting now. Okay, and so how did that feel? And which one were you able to do with most efficiency? So which one was easier? Which one was it the one reading the text, or was it the one reading the ink? And I'm going to take a guess that most people will, in my work, have often said that it is actually the one where you're reading the text and not the ink. However, if we were to do this same test with somebody who didn't read English, or a child who has yet to learn how to read, they would tell you that they would likely have been able to do the one where we are asking them to look at the ink color. And that's because Dr. Michael Cohen does a lot of work around this, is that we've over time been heavily focused on literacy from one form of literacy. And that is the verbal written language form of literacy. And our minds have been trained to focus on that. So as children, we're not born that way, but over time, this is what happens with literacy, that we become focused on this one form of literacy. And when we talk about expanding literacy, I want you to really start thinking about literacy beyond written language forms of literacy. And these are the types of things we want to think about when we think about incorporating earth-based literacies into our libraries. And it's inspired, and it starts with the senses. Okay, nature is sensed. The earth is sensed. And what do we mean by senses? Senses are a faculty through which the body perceives external stimulus, and it's the ability to understand, recognize, value, or react to what's happening to us externally. And this facilitates literacy. Okay, so while verbal language is important, the question is it balanced? Because we now need to think about nature. And if we're going to learn from nature, if we're going to learn through the wisdoms of nature, we're going to have to really think about how do we kind of engage with nature with the senses? Because most of us will know that, when we walk into nature, when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, any of those things, when we walk into a space in nature, we feel an immediate sense of relief. We haven't talked to nature in that verbal way. Nature didn't give us anything to read or listen to in verbal language, but there is a communication that's happening. There's an engagement that's happening. And this is what we talk about when we talk about that nature-inspired learning literacy that I want to encourage you as, members of the library system to really think about. And what is there to learn from the earth? What can nature teach us? There's a few things, and I'm sure you will think of more than this. First of all, it can really teach us about wisdom and intelligence. And when we focus on our personal relationship with nature, it encourages us to engage with nature's wisdom and intelligence. And here are some of the things that we learn. We learn about organization. Nature provides lessons in organization, self-correction, healing, and unconditional love in a way that humans are not able to access through other systems of humanly developed language. Just like I was talking about, sometimes when we just walk into a space, an open space in nature, that relief that comes, right? We also know this concept of balance that exists in nature, that nature is the only entity that doesn't produce any waste or pollution, but rather is perfectly balanced, where everything is reused and has been doing so consistently over the last 3.8 billions of the Earth's time. And so what is that wisdom that enables the Earth to do this? And there's so much that's coming now. I know there's a lot of work that Dr. Suzanne Simard and others have done around, around the wisdom of how our trees build community and the communication that trees have. The world of fungus, that's another area that we're looking at now. So there's all of these forms of wisdom and intelligence that we can take from the earth, how the earth preserves, how the earth communicates, all of these things. Right? And that relationship happens through connecting with the senses. And so a human earth-based relationship enriches human lives, and those natural attractions that we respond through our senses really enable humans to become genuinely caring and act to address issues of harm and destruction to the earth. We know that when we feel connected to something or somebody, we become genuinely concerned, authentically concerned about what's happening to them, and really have this gut reaction to react. And this is what some people call stewardship as well. This is what, that nature-based literacy encourages. And these are the types of things that I want to ask you to think about. So moving on. Dr. Renee Lyons, Associate Professor in School of Librarianship in East Tennessee here, what she talks about is that, when we think about libraries, in her words, she says, these days, I cannot imagine a subject more important than sharing books that celebrate nature and its worth, also relaying the importance of keeping our shared home healthy. And this being a priority for libraries right now. Such literature will encourage environmental stewardship, create a generation that recognizes and understands the value yet fragility of Earth's resources, and propagate a general consensus as to the manner in which humanity must preserve, conserve, and protect such resources that ensures the well-being of all life forms. Libraries really playing an integral role in that. Richard Louv, who writes a lot, he wrote Last Child in the Woods and many other books around, nature and human connection. What he says is that libraries exist in every kind of neighborhood. They already serve as community hubs. They're often supported by friends, groups, and they have existing resources such as nature books. They're often more flexible than schools. They're known for being safe spaces, and so they're really perfect, if unexpected, institutions to connect people to nature. And so really libraries being that space that are already predisposed to supporting communities engage with the earth. And we know that library systems and bodies are really looking at sustainable goals for libraries. We know that the United Nations 2030 Agenda is really an inclusive framework, and it has 17 sustainable developmental goals that they've outlined, and have outlined that libraries really play a key role as institutions to help achieve these goals because of that public access to information, which really helps people to make informed decisions to improve the quality of their own lives and the lives of the communities that surround those library systems. We know that the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions has said that that they really believe that increasing access to information and knowledge across society, assisted by the availability of information and communications technologies, supports sustainable development and improves people's lives. We also know that the American Library Association most recently has identified this as a core guiding principle of librarianship. Recently, saying that sustaining life on this planet and also leading by example by taking steps to reducing their environmental footprint. Libraries really, they encourage libraries to equip communities around these goals towards sustainable development. And we know that even by the concept of the library itself, which have been around for centuries, this model of loaning and sharing resources is really one of the earliest recorded means of reducing and reusing materials. So libraries inherently, in so many ways, are predisposed to support community-based earth connections. And if anybody recognizes here, this is the Waterloo Library in 1903. So the other piece now is, there's these goals, core values of sustainability that we're talking about, but really to move even beyond models of sustainability, we want to really enable our communities to read and engage and build that relationship with the natural environments around them. And Leanne Hooper, who's a librarian and early childhood educator out in Calgary, she writes about this, that, we can't really read the natural world, such as the behaviors of wild animals, the connection between plant species, or the signs in the skies in books, that we really need to encourage this form of nature literacy within our library systems. So what do we do? Let's talk a little bit in terms of practicality. And all these things are things that library systems around Canada and North America and the world are already doing. And so I'm just sharing some examples. Lending differently. Why do we want to do that? Well, we want to increase access to items people wouldn't normally invest in. And we want to really support reduction in consumption and waste of products, right? So beyond books, we're seeing libraries now starting to rent tools such as energy meters or monitors. So things that they may not have, be able to invest or be willing to invest, but if they had the opportunity to borrow those. Gardening tools, again, encouraging being out there. Toys, reducing consumption, musical instruments, new technologies, seasonal outdoor activity equipment, bicycles, skis, skates, all of those things. Passes to places that people may not regularly access or have accessibility to, passes to museums, parks, outdoor events, so passes to places that will encourage people to be going out more. Specialized events, so providing hands-on learning, engaging with the local community around environmental initiatives, So things like upcycling workshops, getting people to really think about upcycling, things about getting workshops around sustainable nutrition habits and practices, workshops around urban gardening, waste prevention, beekeeping workshops, seed sharing initiatives and workshops, repair cafes. And I know many libraries are already engaging in a lot of these things, so just sharing across the board. Nature backpacks. So these are things, what are they? They're basically backpacks that contain guides to local plant life, wilderness that is local in your library's region, a first aid kit, maybe a bug magnification box, binoculars, maps, compasses, so things that you would, take out on a hike that, maybe people don't always think about purchasing or creating. And so it really kind of nurtures that nature interaction, nature exploration, access to things that families would otherwise not purchase and use, and then making it a localized resource. So looking at, again, local maps and guides and putting in fun things in there around scavenger hunts. And this can go even further, engaging this by, online digital, who found what, prizes, posting on social media, all kinds of things. So really engaging in a very different way. Digital nature. So looking at the fact that, there's of course the argument that we want people to get off their screens and be outdoors, but the reality is that there's a huge demographic where you will struggle with that. And so how do we work with that? And so we know that, digital resources are easy to access and use. They will, oftentimes nurture quick engagement. You don't have to think about shipping storage costs within your own physical library spaces. And it may also give you access to diverse resources quickly. So we know one library, I can't remember, maybe Minnesota or Michigan, what they did was they started a hashtag, what did you notice today? And so getting community members to start putting those things up when spring came around, what did you notice in nature today? And starting a whole thread and kind of community posting on that. Access to online publications, so things like newspapers and magazines from around the world. Again, thinking about the diversity within your communities. And, sometimes getting daily newspapers from, halfway across the world may not be reasonable, obviously, in terms of shipping. But if we have those digital resources available within our portals, again, that engagement, nature, again, reducing consumption and shipping and all of those things. Electric car charging stations that are around that library space, again. Connective events. So these are not just your workshops, but but events that actually get people to come out and be outside and engage in nature. And so it's, again, focusing on learning through nature's wisdom, widening that scope of literacy, and really building community-based shared experiences where people are now creating narratives with one another and the earth. Nature-themed story times. So not just picking books that are about the earth, but then actually doing story time outdoors, picking localized storytellers to share stories about the earth. I know this conference is featuring many, many wonderful Indigenous speakers, and I know that they'll be talking a little bit more about, Indigenous storytelling and how do you kind of incorporate that. Pollinator and outdoor reading gardens. Okay, so spaces outdoors that actually encourage new forms of, literacy. Outdoor experiential learning activities. So whether that's going out on hikes together. So we know we have all kinds of library programs indoors, for citizens of the community. How do we take those outside, and how do we do, that engagement with the natural space with those same programs. Sometimes it's taking the same program, just sitting outside and doing it. Sometimes it's actually thinking about what is around you and connecting those to the programming that you're creating. Free shuttle services from the library to national parks, to spaces that people would normally not invest in going out towards, okay? Guided park programs, so programs where you actually, and even hiring or bringing in different languages, different cultural perspectives on the parks and natural spaces, and doing those as guided programs. This is something unique that the Petawawa Library has done, Storytime Trail. So it's learning again through nature's wisdom and kind of widening that scope of literacy. And it's looking at how each page of the book is actually on a different part of the trail. And so you have to complete an entire trail to get your whole story. Another is taking repurposed wood and creating an outdoor book exchange. Again, getting people to really think about how to use that outdoor space differently. Structural designing, so investing, whether it's in artists and architects, and creating, excuse me, in creating, designing indoors architecturally as well as outdoors that actually takes the earth into consideration. So neighborhood butterfly zones within your library space, a community garden where people will naturally come out, and over the course of summer you will see things grow and harvest together, and that will create an entire narrative, right, and shared community experiences. Rainwater collection system where kids can actually watch that and water the garden. Architectural designs that incorporate outdoor space. So looking at not just your indoor space, but how do you create reading spaces outdoors where people can actually hang out around there? Maybe that means some shade in certain areas, those types of things. Natural lighting and workspace views inside your library. How much window space do you have? Where do those windows face? Those types of things. So this obviously requires more planning, more investment, but we're just going to share these ideas and everybody will uptake whatever they're able to after today's presentation. Hiring an actual environmentalist, and we know the London Public Library and the Toronto Public Library have been doing this, and so it's actually investing and bringing expertise and perspectives where people will be committed to focusing on earth-based engagement in a way that is unique to your community and your library space. So they will actually, really audit the area. They'll explore the space and the community that exists around your library, make recommendations that are within the scopes of your library, the objectives and resources that are available to you, and bringing their own expertise in terms of literacy, stewardship, and community perspectives, and hosting events from that perspective. So it's really an investment here. And then looking at governance within your library systems, right? So really looking at how to standardize that commitment to building nature-based literacy within your library systems, where we create agreed upon goals that you hold yourself accountable to, right? And publicly perhaps even displaying a commitment in your spaces, which again encourages participation and brings that to people's attention. Making sure that these goals are part of your strategic plans and clearly identified within your KPIs as concrete outcomes that you hold yourself accountable, ensuring that this priority is a regular item on the agenda at every level of your systems. The last thing I want to end with is looking at nature and diverse communities. So we know that people of color, studies are showing that they are 3 times more likely to live in areas that do not have immediate access to natural spaces. And so, that access to natural trails and parks, national parks, all of those things, people of color are usually a lot less likely to be in those spaces or have access to those. And so the other thing I also want to ask you is how many stories of people of marginalized communities and their nature experiences in history do we hear about? Do we hear about, there's Jacqueline F. Scott, who's doing a lot of work around Black people and the earth. So when we look at, for example, slaves that were moving from parts of America to Canada, they were engaging with the earth. They were navigating, they knew how to navigate, in natural spaces. But where are those narratives? Those types of things. When we, there is not one cultural group, one group of people that doesn't have a nature narrative. Every single human is impacted by the earth and engages with the earth. Where are those stories? And so how do our environmental impacts cause impacts to marginalized communities around the globe? Do we actually build literacy around this fact that most of us here living in North America, our environmental footprint is so large, and that impact, what impact does it have on marginalized communities on other parts of the world? How do we bring that literacy, that awareness, and bring those narratives into our library spaces? How do our books, how do our events actually engage in that? And we know that climate change is a global issue. So if we're really going to do anything to address it, we need to include everybody in that equation. And we know that diverse backgrounds have unique narratives, histories, and experiences that can really enrich our efforts to address climate change, to really improve the lived experiences of humanity. So, again, looking at the fact that a lot of our understanding about science and the earth and nature is based on a Western scientific model. And oftentimes our books are also reflective of that understanding of nature and the earth. So how do we then start to think about widening that and really bringing everybody into this narrative? How do we engage on this? So here are some things that we can do. We can provide workshops and events in multiple languages. Connect with diverse community environmental nature groups. So looking at what exists perhaps very close to you or maybe a little bit further out, but that you can engage with diverse groups, environmental groups. Find out who is in your library's community and invite their expertise to speak about the earth and nature from diverse perspectives. And this doesn't necessarily have to be an academic, or it doesn't have to be somebody who, is a professional. It could be somebody in your community who, just engages with nature in a very unique way. It could be somebody who's participating in your community garden initiative who has a story to tell. How do we share those stories? How do we bring books about nature and the earth into our collection that really introduces those diverse narratives? We know so many, parts of the world, there's stories that are in oral traditions. How do we bring those oral traditions and earth-based stories and experiences into our library systems? So this is Dr. Muhammad Lawal, and he is a board member of the Hennepin County Library System, and he's also an architect, and he's been heavily involved in looking at building natural spaces within library system in the Hennepin County. And what he says is that we really need more diverse voices, diverse cultures, diverse individuals to share. Together, we will create a more welcoming, inclusive, and diverse environment that relates and represents all of us. And we know that even people on the ground who are really talking about the environmental crisis are really talking about how to address the issue. And so in 2021, Bioscience released this article where 11,000 scientists, many of you may be aware of this article, 11,000 scientists globally signed on to really say that we're in this deep climate crisis. And what they said is that if we really want to look at change, this is how we need to approach it. And this is what it says in the article. To secure a sustainable future, we must change how we live. This entails major transformations in the ways our global society functions and interacts with natural ecosystems. And so these are the relationships that we have with the earth. And if we're going to nurture those relationships and build nature-based literacy, we're going to have to start with taking the earth as an example and think about how we engage through our senses. And the earth itself is a great example. We know that any forest or any natural space that thrives is one that is most diverse. If you leave a space to grow in its own way, what you'll see is that there will be multiple species that exist in that space. And that's what really makes that earth rich, full of nutrients. And then other species come and they all thrive in this symbiotic relationship with one another. And that is really what diversity means. It means, but it also is what earth-based relationships look like, learning from the earth and then taking and becoming a part of that and creating, as Dr. Albert was talking talking about that symbiosine. So that is really where I wanted to end today. And I want to thank you for listening and engaging. These slides, I know they're text heavy, and the hope is that you can use them as resources as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is here, and I look forward to listening and engaging and participating in the rest of the conference with you. Take good care.